Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Theology Thursday. I'm Pastor Chris Laughlin, Messiah Lutheran Church, as always joined by my brilliant and thoughtful colleague, Reverend James Smith, pastor of St. John Lutheran Church in Three Rivers and rector of Trinity Episcopal Church, also in Three Rivers. How are you, Pastor James?
Fine and dandy. How about yourself, Pastor Chris?
I'm glad I'm inside on this dreary day.
Although when this airs, it's nice. In which case,
perhaps this day isn't dreary. I don't know yet how things are today. But today our topic is the seventh commandment, because that's where we are. We have made it through the first six. Now we are on to the seventh. And Pastor James, what is the seventh commandment according to Lutherans?
Don't steal.
Don't steal.
Yep.
That seems easy enough.
Right? As you say to your cat or your dog, drop it.
Oh, no. That doesn't work with cats.
No, it doesn't.
I think you know that doesn't work with cats.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this in the pregame. I got to show you. There it is. It's not as funny, but
share screen.
I'm about to. The original was, yeah, give me just a second here.
So what is this about stealing? I'll continue while Pastor Chris is looking this up.
Pastor James?
Now I can see it, yeah. I regret nothing. Nothing.
The original that I'm thinking of has a cat obviously being held by a human with a giant piece of pizza sticking out of its mouth.
There you go.
I regret nothing. Nothing!
So we know you can't put the fear of God in cats. But the question is, can you in humans? So you are not to steal. What is this? Answer. We are to fear and love God so that we neither take our neighbor's money or property, nor acquire them by using shoddy, and I'm being careful to say that accurately, shoddy merchandise or crooked deals, but instead help them to improve and protect their property and income. Pastor, do you wake up every morning asking yourself how you can help me improve and protect my property and income?
I think of neither of those things, Pastor James. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So what stands out to you in this answer in the Small Catechism about the seventh commandment?
Well, I mean, as we've discussed before, right, it's not just, we do this because we fear and love God. So the first commandment is still the foundation of all the other commandments. It also stands out to me that we are not to acquire our neighbor's property. What are the words there? Not to take our neighbor's money or property. So that's first, right? Don't take what isn't yours.
That's the drop it part.
That's the drop it part, right?
Yeah.
But then, like, I can't write you a check for, the stack of books, knowing that the check is bad.
Yeah. Or even maybe a great comparison of a terrible thing that was in the news recently was the government's contracts they made with American Indians back in the day, where it was like, it's technically legal what's going on. It is a deal, but either they didn't know what was being signed away, or it was just a really shoddy deal that the American government put on offer.
Yeah. Interesting. Or how about originally, you give us gold and we give you glass beads, right?
Right. Yeah, so that's...
shoddy merchandise or crooked deals. And there are all kinds of ways to do crooked deals.
Right.
Before I knew how to buy and sell, mostly sell on the internet, I would try to sell a thing. A person would promise to buy the thing, and then 10 minutes before he or she showed up would try to get the price down. When I've already told any other interested parties, no, and I've got to leave, right? I was moving at the time.
Or think of putting 60 pages of terms and conditions in an online deal that you know no one's going to read. And it turns out you've just signed away your right to be monitored for all your online activity and tastes and interests. You know, and then technically, well, it's all there in the terms of the contract. We would not call that stealing. And I think one thing Luther does with this commandment that he does with so many of them is he tries to take away the veneer of our self-justification of, well, that's not really stealing because we have a legal contract. And he's trying to say, you know, technically that may not be stealing in the eyes of the law, but it is not something where you had your neighbor's best interest at heart. You were trying to get ahead in this deal.
Yeah, the end user license agreement, right? The EULA, where everybody just clicks and agrees because you want to use the product, right? You probably already bought the product and now you just agree to use it.
Yeah.
So that's first. So first there's don't take it. Don't acquire it by, and yeah, I didn't even think about that, Pastor James, shoddy merchandise or crooked deals. But then the third piece of that is instead help them to improve and protect. I think one of the translations with which I'm familiar calls that defend their property and income. And that's really interesting because when I think about that, I think about if you go back to the 30s when, you know, workers were striking and being beaten because they were working 18-hour days and being paid, you know, half a cent an hour. They banded together to protect their income, right?
Right.
Also interesting. So I'll say I used to know a guy, it's a little more complicated than that, but I used to know a guy who grew fruit and would sell it at the fruit markets. And he was banned from one of them because he would put bad strawberries on the bottom of the quart and good strawberries on the top of the quart, and they weren't made of plastic. They were made of that green cardboard stuff. And so people would buy the quart of strawberries and they'd get like 5 or 6 good strawberries and the rest would all be rotten.
Well, that doesn't sound fair.
It sounds shoddy to me.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know.
Yeah. So I looked up your question about the translation. Defend is the right word, but I think that the improve is the word bessern, which besser is the German word for better. So how do you make their property better? I think defending it is one thing. I think this improving is really interesting. Like, you know, what if how do you improve your neighbor's property? That's something most of us I don't think we think of these days. If we don't rip them off and we help them to keep what's theirs, I think most of us would say we're doing a pretty good job.
That's an interesting question. Is would I be improving your property if I said you have 2 options in your area for internet service and I strongly recommend you don't go with one of them?
Yeah, I think that would be a good example. Maybe you gave someone some investment tips for free before you took it yourself or something like that.
Online reviews, does that help improve somebody's property? I could mow your lawn, that would be improving your property.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Give you flowers so you could plant them outside.
If you planted the flowers yourself, otherwise you're just creating work.
So, I'm not a gardener either. I agree with your analysis there.
So I think if you take a step back and just look at the Small Catechism 1, what would you say Luther's doing? Well, what I would say he is doing is he's turning our focus on property from myself to my neighbor, basically. So it's not enough to try to be fair, but it's just how can I genuinely benefit my neighbor in every business transaction? So at the very least, he's saying make deals that are good deals for both sides, or if anything, deals where you lose. So obviously, this is not a glossy covered bestseller at the front of Barnes and Noble about religion and business.
No.
Because honestly, I'm not sure how the economy would work if I thought about my neighbor's interests before my own. There's literally no economy that's ever been tried that has worked like that.
So it's really interesting, right? So I was taught when I was very young that the way the market works is I set up a stand in front of my house and I pay $15 for the cardboard, and I pay $10 for the lemons, and I pay roughly $1 for the water, and I pay roughly $4 for the sugar. And so I've just spent $30 setting up my lemonade stand, right? And I make 100 glasses of lemonade out of that. I'm just making up all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means each glass of lemonade cost me 30 cents. I do a fair markup and I charge, we'll say 50 cents. That's not actually how the economy works. The economy works, how much is that glass of lemonade worth? And the question of worth then in that model becomes, how much will someone else pay for it? Not that the lemonade has any intrinsic value, which in theory it does, right?
Right. And people intuitively get angry about that, I find, because they say, how can you charge this much for something so simple? And I always go back to, well, the system works that the price is based on what you will pay for it. So if you don't think it's fair, don't pay for it. That's how capitalism works, and then it lowers the price. But I think Luther has something more in mind of kind of take enough to make what you spent on the supplies, like you're talking about, and then a little bit for your labor and your basic needs, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's Luther, and it's not just here. I mean, he's consistent. It definitely says it here, but he also says it. He wrote a treatise, a book called on Trade and Usury. Might be against trade and usury, but I think it's on trade and usury. And I'll say, it is wrong that poor people pay higher interest rates on everything than middle class and rich people. It is wrong. Oh, don't even get me started on payday lenders. They're criminal. And that's not how much a thing is worth. That's how much trouble is your neighbor in.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the problem with all this is that, I'm selling to someone on the other side of the world, or, I have no idea, these aren't my neighbors. I don't know them. They're just nameless, faceless numbers, clients.
Right. Which is more and more the case.
And your thing about don't buy it and the price will drop is, it works if you're talking about iPhones, because no one really needs an iPhone. Yes, I know no one really needs a Samsung Galaxy S9 either. I'm not just picking on Apple. It works less when you're talking about basic necessities. I was just listening to an article, I think it was in the Washington Post, but it was in the Wall Street Journal. There is a high inflation rate, but not on everything. And so the overall inflation rate's kind of flat right now, but not if you're buying, flour.
Yeah. Well, and I will also say, though, that for most of those basic necessities that people really need, you get a lot of suppliers who get into the business, and the competition is what ends up forcing the price down. So I'm not. I think Luther's interesting because I am someone that generally does believe that free markets have taken us from the feudal economy Luther lived in to today, where I can go to the store and have 68 different choices of craft beer or whatever to drink. You'll notice today, by the way, we're not eating out or anything, so none of that's in the picture for today. Which is not to say that his critique. I think you're making the argument a little bit for him right now, which is he does have a valid moral critique, and I think people living in poverty, especially, don't all experience this economic growth the same way. And I think that's a fair point. But then to be fair to capitalism, at the time to be poor meant that you were literally eating rotten meat a couple times a year and getting the bubonic plague. So it's complicated. I think economics is one of the toughest issues in the Bible because it's so radically different from capitalism. Which is not to say it's anti-capitalism, by the way, as we were talking.
We talked in the pregame, yes.
It's just pre-capitalism. It's not an option that's on the table. So I think you have this whole thing where what happens when this is a bit broader, we're still going to get to the large catechism, but what happens when theology and human reason intersect? And I think that's a really tough thing, because I think economics is definitely human reason, and part of the way it's human reason is people come up with such radically different answers for it.
Both of them, if they're Christian, point to the Bible and say the Bible supports my position. Does it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. God told us to love people and to make sure everyone has enough to do our part for that. But depending on who you talk to, there are radically different ways to get to that. And I think we need to be fair about that. I think sometimes it's assumed that at least sometimes it's assumed by people on the left that only government programs can possibly fix this, and that therefore people on the right who are more free market capitalist don't care about poverty. And that is the case for some of them. I'm not going to say it's not, but for many it's no. They look at the long history of aid programs that started out with the best of intentions and then ended up not doing anything or even making the problem worse. That's my little soapbox on the matter. But
I mean, for me, I would take your assertions one step further, right? But it has nothing to do with the large catechism, at least not to where we've gotten yet. At the summary of the large catechism, we'll get there. And you've alluded to it, right? We can't fulfill these commandments. But for me, it's really based in Article 2 of the Augsburg Confession, which we've talked about at least briefly in our previous Augsburg Confession Theology Thursday episode, where the problem isn't the economic or social or political system. The problem is people. If we are as sinful as we believe we are, and I believe we are, if our anthropology is correct, our theological anthropology is as low as it really is, and Luther goes on to talk about how truly wicked people are in all 10 commandments.
Yeah.
If you read the large catechism, Luther's got a very dark view of humanity, and I agree with him wholeheartly. Then the economic system will be flawed, not because of the system itself, because of the people who are involved.
Let me, I'll try to take things in order here. One is, one quote that comes to mind for me as we're having this discussion is Jesus's quote, "The poor you will always have with you," which is a quote that's been very abused, because notice that he is saying something that is a fact. He is not saying something that's normative. He's not saying, "The poor you will always have with you, so who the hell cares?"
It's descriptive, it's not prescriptive.
Exactly, thank you. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. And I think Luther ends up agreeing with that, because as always, as you've seen with the pattern, he looks at these commandments as a chance to follow them and do good works that please God. And he pretty much says that actually, if you really care about helping your neighbor and their property, protecting it and improving it, you'll be busy your entire life, and which is, I think, true for both of us. Second, I just want to say, when it comes to dark view of human nature, I don't think that's quite right. I think he has a realistic view of the impact of sin, on human nature, which is created in the image of God. So it's not human nature itself that's the problem, it's sin. But as you said, perhaps we'll get there later.
I think we will. So we've touched on drop it, right? I was 5 years old. We were in a Wawa. Have you been to a Wawa there, Pastor James?
Yeah, but that's a 4-letter word in Western Pennsylvania, where my wife is from, and Central and West. We both went to seminary in Gettysburg, which is Central.
Well, and I grew up in the eastern part of Pennsylvania.
So probably a lot of our viewers aren't familiar.
Wawa is a convenience store, and it is a most excellent convenience store.
Okay, well, we can disagree on that. So Pennsylvania and the East in general, but especially Pennsylvania, they have 2 competing chains that are kind of like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. It's basically if you matched a fast food place and a convenience store and a gas station all together, you would get something that's called Sheetz. Again, I have to be careful how I pronounce it, Sheetz, or Wawa, W-A-W-A. And in Eastern Pennsylvania, so like Philadelphia, I think New Jersey is Wawa territory. Allentown, where I did my chaplaincy, is Wawa. Sheetz is Western Pennsylvania, Central and Western Pennsylvania, into Ohio a little bit. They've got a broad reach, West Virginia. Anyway, point being, if you talk to any Pennsylvanian, they will swear by either one of these. And it'll be like, well, as soon as we cross the border into Pennsylvania, I need to stop at the first Sheetz or Wawa that I see.
Yes, absolutely we do. And buy a tasty cake. Well,
and the thing is, like, they offer gas and convenience store and fast food, but I would say the only thing they're particularly good at of the 3 is convenience store.
We're going to move on, and I'm going to tell my story, or I'm going to have to reach through this computer screen.
I just think if I'm stopping for fast food, I'd have better luck at like even a BK than I would at a Wawa or at a Sheetz.
Oh my, them's fighting words. We're going to have to talk about this in person when the recording is off. They make excellent
shoddy merchandise.
They make it's more deli than a fast food chain. But moving on. I was in a Wawa. I was very young. I took a candy bar. My father didn't see it till we were outside the store, and he was disturbed, distraught, animated, and he hauled my 5-year-old butt back into the Wawa and made me give it back and apologize to the store clerk, who tried to insist that it was okay, and he most vociferously insisted that it was not, in fact, okay. Don't do that.
Yeah.
That's stealing number 1. Stealing is a widespread common vice, but people pay so little attention to it that the matter is entirely out of hand. As a result, if we were to hang every thief on the gallows, especially those who did not admit it, the world would soon be empty, and there would be a shortage of both hangmen and gallows. Stealing is not just robbing someone's safe or pocketbook, but also taking advantage of someone in the market. In all stores, butcher shops, wine and beer cellars, workshops, and in short, wherever business is transacted and money is exchanged for goods and services. He goes on, right? We shall make this a bit clearer to the common people, so that they may see how upright we are. Suppose, for example, that a manservant or maidservant is unfaithful in his or her domestic duties and does damage or permits damage to be done where it could have been avoided. Or suppose that through laziness, carelessness, or malice, a servant wastes things or is negligent with them in order to vex and annoy the master or mistress. When this is done deliberately, for I am not speaking about what happens accidentally or unintentionally. You can cheat your employer out of 30 or 40 or more gulden a year. I assume that's a lot of money. I have no idea.
Yeah.
If someone had filched or stolen that much, he would have been hung on the gallows. But here you become defiant and insolent, and no one dare call you a thief.
Yeah, I think it's I enjoy that. I think of time theft as like something that's come out in the last, couple decades or whatever, that, to have a word for it. But that's exactly what he's describing here, is if you're at work, you should be working.
I say the same things about artisans, workers, and day laborers who act high-handedly and never know enough ways to overcharge people, and yet are careless and unreliable in their work. These are all far worse than sneak thieves, against whom we can guard with lock and bolt. If we catch the sneak thieves, we can deal with them so that they will not do it anymore. But no one can guard against these others. No one even dares to give them a harsh look or accuse them of theft. People would 10 times rather lose money from their purse. For these are my neighbors, my good friends, my own servants, from whom I expect good, who are the first to defraud me.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's my personal favorite. Yes, we might well keep quiet here about individual petty thieves, since we ought to be attacking the great, powerful arch thieves. Right, and of course he goes on to talk about the Roman Catholic Church of his day, but go ahead. Sorry.
So by the time this airs, we'll be getting close to Reformation Day and Reformation Sunday. But this is, I think, underappreciated when it comes to what was actually going on. People say the 95 Theses were posted out of his great concern about how salvation was understood, that it's not for sale, and I'd say that's basically true. But I'd also say that there was seriously an economic and if you will social justice aspect to it, that not just that you made salvation into a commodity, but literally that you're robbing people of money that could be used on things that actually matter. So that that's one example of the way that he would say the church was violating do not steal at the time.
And he goes on to attack, if we look at the whole world and all its situations, it is nothing but a big, wide stable full of great thieves. This is why these people are also called armchair bandits and highway robbers. Far from being pickpockets and sneak thieves who pilfer the cash box, they sit in their chairs and are known as great lords and honorable, upstanding citizens, while they rob and steal under the cloak of legality. In short, this is the way of the world. Those who can steal and rob openly are safe and free, unpunished by anyone even desiring to be honored.
I think there's I like this part because I think there's a bit of populist anger in Luther here about yeah, I mean we all know these people. I don't need to name him or her or them. We know these people that bad business transactions, real estate deals, offshoring your workers, not paying your taxes,
hiding your money overseas. Yeah,
exactly. And they show up in a suit, so you assume they must be a decent person, or at least many people do. And he actually says, you know what, that's worse than the thief who steals your cell phone and sells it on the black market to make rent.
Well, I mean, it's the question that's essentially asked at the beginning of Les Mis, right? Les Miserables. Is it the same to steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving family as it is as other kinds of theft are?
Yeah, and to be fair, Luther is not a bleeding heart when it comes to that either, though. Like he would say theft is theft. His point is not that that stealing bread is not as bad as white collar theft. His point is that white collar theft is as bad as stealing bread, I would say.
I'm checking the
because
sorry.
Think about it. I think what Luther would say, and I'm not sure I agree with this, but I think it's what he would say is that if you're stealing your bread, you're violating the seventh commandment. You're not really trusting that God will provide. God who tells us to pray, give us this day our daily bread.
But they should know that God considers them the greatest thieves, and that he will punish them as they deserve. I think he thinks that it's worse to be the high and honorable, to walk in a suit.
Yeah, but I guess my point is I think that many people today, and I'd probably be among them, would be more like the clerk at the counter of Wawa, who would say, you know what, if you really need this to feed your family, that's okay. And I don't think Luther's saying that, like, for better or for worse. I don't get that.
No. I don't think he's excusing any thievery.
Yeah.
But I think he's calling it worse if you're nobility and you're stealing from your own.
Well, and it's not just the amount being stolen, but think of what one of the most important things for Luther is. It's hypocrisy. You see that over and over again. In the Large Catechism and in other works, the people who really tick him off and who he would say really tick God off and are deceiving themselves are the people who think of themselves as good, but are just as bad, if not worse, than anyone else.
And I also think in Luther, he basically says this, theft sort of becomes its own punishment. Yes, God will punish those who do the thieving, especially the great and the mighty. At the same time, what does a thief fear more than anything else? Theft. Right?
Well, and that even goes to white-collar crime. I think people rightly probably are always convinced that someone else is trying to rip them off.
The upright, meanwhile, will have enough, and you will hurt yourself more than anyone else. But beware of how you deal with the poor. There are many of them now, who must live from hand to mouth. If you act as if everyone has to live by your favor, if you skin and scrape them right down to the bone, if you arrogantly turn away those who need your aid, they will go away wretched and dejected, and because they can complain to no one else, they will cry out to heaven. Beware of this, I repeat, as if it were the devil himself. Such sighs and cries are no laughing matter, but will have an effect too great for you and all the world to bear, for they will reach God, who watches over poor troubled hearts, and he will not leave them unavenged. Yeah,
and I would say that would be Luther's answer to stealing bread, which is that your town, your village should not let this happen in the first place.
Well, and if for at the beginning he says we hang those people, right?
Right. But he does have a strong concern, a strong social concern. So I think it's near, I believe, where you were reading. But towards the end, he says, in addition, we are commanded to promote and further our neighbors' interests. Maybe this is what he means by improve their property. And he says, and when they suffer any want, we are to help, share, and lend to both friends. All right, who doesn't want to help out a friend? And foes. So everybody.
Yeah, I see it now. I think you're on page 419.
419 to 420, right.
He's reading a paper copy. I'm reading an electronic copy. So sometimes it's hard to tell where we are. They are the same translation. It's the same book. It's just different forms. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You see that someone has, I mean, this is how you improve it, right? You see that someone has a candy bar and that's all they have to eat. So you give them a salad. That sounds stupid, but it really is possible.
Right. And what other commandment does this really connect to then?
The fifth commandment and the ninth and 10th commandments.
Yeah, I was going for fifth. The 9th and 10th, of course, too, about covenant, but we'll get there later. But there's a strong, I think Luther realizes that stealing comes about a lot of times because people are trying to keep their lives. And of course, that is your neighbors. As neighbors, we are supposed to help keep each other alive. So by improving your neighbor's property, helping meet basic needs, you're also fulfilling the fifth commandment of protecting the neighbor's life and body.
Yeah, the commandments sort of work backwards, don't they, in terms of their connections?
Yeah. So I think one big takeaway I have about this, and we definitely kind of touched it, but I just want to make it clear. I think for Luther, do not steal is only kind of a small symptom, and really he's looking at how do we have a society that is fair, just, and life-giving when it comes to property?
First, we are forbidden to do our neighbors any injury or wrong in any way imaginable, whether by damaging, withholding, or interfering with their possessions and property. We are not even to consent or permit such a thing, but are rather to avert and prevent it. In addition, we are commanded to promote and further our neighbors' interests, and when they suffer any want, we are to help, share, and lend to both friend and foes.
Yeah, I think he would say if you really want to get rid of stealing, you can have a role in that and helping make sure that people get enough. And again, the whole economics discussion I think that's another discussion. I think that's more for economists, for people who use reason. Not that theologians don't use reason or pastors don't use reason. But I think if that's your starting, I think Luther's trying to give us a starting point of what life looks like under the Ten Commandments, and at bottom that really means that people don't need to steal bread, and that people don't charge each other exorbitant interest or as you were talking about earlier. And as we pointed out earlier, we're a long way from that. And I think I say we as a society. I would also say I myself, because I think if you take this seriously, every transaction you make is a moral transaction, and that can be intimidating to think about. Like I don't know where this hoodie was made, but there's a pretty good chance it probably wasn't made under conditions Luther would say were fair,
Well said. Yeah, life under the Ten Commandments. Life as God would want us to live it.
Yeah. It's frustrating in a sense because you can see how the world could be a much better place with each of these. I think that was clear when we talked about the Sixth Commandment last week too.
Yeah.
If we valued humans as humans instead of as objects, and what if we valued objects as means to supporting one another instead of for our own personal enjoyment?
Well said. And I think a good place to call it. Unless you have something else to add, Pastor James?
Nope. Next week, we get to bearing false witness.
Or in this case, not bearing false witness.
Yeah, and not witnessing bears either, although I hope to do that someday in the wild.
False or otherwise, right?
Yeah, have a great week, everybody.
Have a great week.